Hello everyone, I am Shreya Shukla. This is the live session for Structure, Form and Architecture, the Synergy. We will wait for 5 minutes for people to join. This is the live session for Structure, Form and Architecture, the Synergy NPTEL course. We are waiting for others to join. We will wait for 5 minutes and then we will start the session. It has been 5 minutes, and we will see if others will join in sometime. We will start with the session now. So, hello everyone, welcome to the live session, second live session for Structure, Form and Architecture, the Synergy. This is an NPTEL course done by Professor Shubhajit Sadiq Khan, IIT Roorkee. I am Shreya Shukla. I am the course TA for this course. Today we will be doing week 2 assignment 2, and today I have also searched for other previous year questions, and I have added 15 questions today. Last session we did 10 questions. This session I will be doing 15 questions. So we have already discussed about this in the last class, and you all must have also learned this in your NPTEL course. So the entire course is about structure, form, architecture and synergy, and what all these terms mean. So structure is basically a system that is used to support and transmit loads. Form is a three-dimensional object or building that is perceived by a viewer in space and time. Architecture is the art and technique or the science of designing and building. And synergy basically means the interaction of two or more things in which the combined effect of two or more things produce a greater effect. So moving on to the week 2 syllabus. So the syllabus covered in the week 2 was connecting structure and architecture part 1, connecting structure and architecture part 2. I hope I am audible and my screen is also visible to everyone. Structural transformation in architectural history, factors affecting the structural forms, and learning from animals architecture. In the lecture 6, relationship of structure with architecture, it was discussed how in form of the architecture, how in the form, what dominates when architecture dominates, when design dominates, when structure dominates, and how it leads to the form of the building. And there were various kinds of examples that were shared with you, and there were to understand the relationship of structure and architecture, and the screen is still visible, right? Please let me know if the screen is not visible, because it is showing not visible. Okay, thank you. So the 5 points that were covered in this lecture about the relationship of structure with the architecture was ornamentation of structure, structure as ornament, structure as architecture, structure accepted and structure ignored. And these terms seem a little bit confusing, but if you have watched the NPTEL session, then you would have understood what these terms actually mean. We will not go in detail about it here, and maybe cover some part of it while we are solving the question. And then the part 1 and part 2 covered all these 5 points. Part 1 covered ornamentation of structure and structure as ornament, and part 2 covered structure as architecture, structure accepted and structure ignored. Then moving on to lecture 8, which was structural transformation in architectural history. This part basically covers the entire history, right from the prehistoric times to the current time, and how the structures and architecture has changed throughout this history. The reason of these changes has been because human needs change with time, our requirements change with time, our cultures evolved, different parts of the world have different religions, and religions have systematically always influenced the architecture of that time. Then with time, technology evolved also, and all these factors have led to the transformation in architecture and structure. So that all part is covered in this lecture, and right from prehistoric to the current time or contemporary time. So it has covered prehistoric, Egyptian, classical, Byzantine, Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, Rococo, Neoclassicism, Art Nouveau, Beaux Arts, Art Deco, Beaux Arts, Neo-Gothic, Art Deco, Modernist style, Postmodernism, Neo Modernism, and Parametricism. So all this lecture has covered different kinds of characters of all of these eras, different kinds of buildings of all these eras, famous buildings of all these eras, and it has basically tried to show how with time we have evolved and where we are right now, and to identify the various kind of structures that were involved throughout these eras of architecture. Next lecture 9 was about factors affecting the structural forms. I'm so sorry, I just had a power cut. I hope we are still connected. Okay. So next part was factors affecting the structural forms. So this lecture basically talked about all the kinds of physical and social factors that impact the architecture, and these factors are these factors that influence or impact the structural form are basically requirements, the kinds of user, the purpose, everything related to that. The loads on the building, we have discussed about the loads in the last week, and you must have covered it in the NPTEL course also, the different kinds of loads there are, how they're impacting the structure, how it affects the structure, how do we consider those loads in our construction. Then the design, basically design covers the concept of the designer or the architect, the visual parts of it and other things. And then another factor that covers is the culture, like I just said. Basically the culture, because of different eras that have evolved, and culture has been to do with different religions in most of the cases. So not always, but yeah, of course religion has been a prominent point in defining the culture and defining the architecture of some eras. So these specific culture or the specific religions lead to different kinds of beliefs, and these beliefs have been translated into architecture over these eras. So culture has played a huge role in the architecture of all the time, and the structure of all the time, and the structural form. For example, domes have been characterized with Islamic architecture, and the use of huge ornamentation and other things have been related with cathedrals. Even the type of material that has been used has been defined by culture in a lot of places. And moving forward, the other point is geography. For example, the soil and the earth around there, and the geography basically leads to the development of what kind of foundation we would be using, and if the area is earthquake prone or not, do we have to consider that part. Then comes climate. So climate hugely impacts the structural form of a building, because climate leads to influences your design decisions, because in different climates you need different kinds of structures. For example, in a climate which has snowfall, you would require sloping structures, and while in a climate that is hot, very hot, like a desert climate, you would require thick walls to keep the inside of your rooms warm. So the climate has a huge impact or a huge role in the architectural form, and it also climate also influences the kind of material that you are using. Then comes the technology. So of course, with different technologies, different things can be done, and with the evolving technology, we all know where we are. We are living in the era of skyscrapers, where we have such huge skyscrapers, and all of that is only possible because we have had technological advancement. So of course, we used to start right with the prehistoric era. The prehistoric people used to make their houses with the help of stones and other things. Then we moved on to mud bricks, then we moved on to carved stones, then we moved on to ornamentation, then we slowly moved on to concrete, then we moved on to frame structures, then the steel came in play, and then glass came in play. So of course, with technology, huge construction is possible now, very high construction, we have skyscrapers, and with technology, the use of different kinds of materials has also been impacted. And then this lesson talked about the 6 M's of construction, which are basically material, machinery, manpower, methods, money, and minutes. So material I just mentioned, and machine, basically the kinds of equipments you have available, and that helps in the speed of construction, that helps in the level of detailing and other things. Manpower includes anyone like the architects, the designers, the structural engineers, the MEP engineers, MEP meaning mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers, all kinds of, even the laborers, all the manpower. Basically, with the better manpower, the better your design and the better your building will be. Methods, so the methods can be distinguished into two parts mainly, which is in situ construction and ex situ construction. So in situ is basically anything that is being done on the site. So most of the cases you see in situ constructions. However, there is also, with technological development, now we have ex situ options, which is basically that the material, or the building part including the frame is made somewhere else, and then it is brought into the site and then assembled together. Most of the examples include prefabricated structures and other things. Then we have money, of course. The more the money, the more details, and the outcome is better. The equipment, machinery, labor, everything would be more efficient if more money is involved in any project. So money usually affects the outcome and the process also of construction. And the last is minutes, which is basically time. So time, however time any construction would take, so to have cost effective buildings, we can do that with the help of increasing the manpower, having better technologies and other things, and that could reduce the time of the construction. So these were all the lectures that were covered in week 2. So moving now from this lecture, we will go to our questions. So whatever questions I would be doing right now, they are previous year questions, they are not this year's question. Danish, if you have a question, you can please type it in the message box. I will see that and I will answer it. Please type it in the chat box and I will see it and answer it. Can you not hear me, Danish? Please, whatever your question is, type it in the chat box and then I will answer it when I am done with the questions. Thank you. You raising hand again and again is disturbing because it is creating a noise. I am requesting you to please type the question in the chat box. I will answer your question. Please type the question in the chat box. Everyone, please let me know if the screen is still visible. So whatever question I would be doing right now are previous year questions, they are not this year's question. So this I am clarifying again because sometimes people think that we would be doing the questions of this year. No, we are not going to do that. We are doing previous year questions so that you can build on your knowledge base and you can understand what kind of questions come. And this helps in your preparation of this subject. So moving on, the first question is excuse me. Yeah. So the first question is, which of the following column type is shown in the image below? Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and Tuscan. So first thing is that we should know, which is very important and basic. I hope the screen is visible now. So, firstly, we should know, which is a very basic and very important thing, that the three orders and the three basic decorative systems was developed by Greeks, and they are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Romans, however, developed two more orders after being inspired by the Greek styles, and these two are Tuscan and Composite styles. So these are the five classical orders, but the main three are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, which are the Greek orders. The Tuscan and Composite ones have been made. Hi Pooja, sorry if my voice is lagging a little. It may be the problem of internet connection. Is it coming fine now? Okay, fine, we'll continue. So, these are the five orders. We will understand all of these orders so you can answer these questions better. So, what is a Doric order? So, in a Doric order, the main features of a Doric order are that they're massive, they're huge in size. For as you can see in this image, other columns are comparatively thin or slender than Doric. Doric is the more massive one and more broad one. Another property of Doric is that they are very plain, they are not very decorative. If you see other columns, you can see the capital of Doric is very plain as compared to Ionic and Corinthian. They have more decorative capitals while Doric is plain. Also, another feature of Doric is that the columns are tapering, that means their size reduces when they go on to the top, and also the columns have flutes, which is basically, it is not circular, it is rather a shape like a flower. They have flutes. These are, I should have added a section of it, but I'm sorry, but I hope you are able to understand that it looks like a flower if you cut the section of this column. It will not look like a cylinder or a circle. The ionic column. So ionic columns are more slender as compared to the Doric columns, and they are more ornamental and they are more ornate. They have, for example, in their capital, we have a scroll shape like thing. So ionic orders are characterized by these scroll shaped things. Next is the Corinthian order. So the important features of Corinthian order is that it is more or less similar to ionic columns. For example, in how the base looks, in how the column looks, and how the entablature also looks. Uh, as you can see in this image, the entablature, basically the horizontal part right above the capital, is called the entablature. So entablature of a Doric column is different, while entablature of ionic and Corinthian is very same. And the Corinthian and ionic even are very same in the shape and in the shape of their column, the slenderness and other things. So their Corinthian is very similar to ionic in the entablature, in the column and in the base. But the difference is the capital. Corinthian has more decorative capital than ionic even, and these capitals have been inspired by the acanthus leaves. So coming to these are the three classical main points: Doric, Ionic and Corinthian order. But as the question also talked about Tuscan order, so I am covering Tuscan also here. So Tuscan is very similar to Doric. So both the columns are very simple and they're without any carvings or ornaments like the Ionic and Corinthian. They have very detailed capitals. But how is Tuscan different from Doric? Tuscan is a little slender than Doric, and Doric column doesn't have a base. The base, basically, Doric column doesn't have a base, Tuscan has a base. Second is the shaft or the column of Tuscan column. It is smooth, it is like a cylinder. So if you cut the section, you will only see a circle. While just like I mentioned right now, that if you cut the section of a Doric column, you will see flutes. You will see a flower-like structure. So if you go here and you compare, you can see Tuscan is slimmer or slender than Doric. Tuscan has a base, Doric does not have a base. And you can see that Doric has these flutes, Tuscan doesn't have a flute. So these are the major differences. So again, coming back to our question, which asks, which of the following column type is shown in this figure? So as you can see, it has, first of all, you can see the flutes in this column. Secondly, you can see a very highly decorated capital. So I think it is evident now that the answer is Corinthian. These are the capital heads of different column types. You can see Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian and composite. So Doric has a plain column, plain capital head, and Tuscan is very similar to Doric. Ionic has scroll-like capital heads. Corinthian has very decorative capital heads, and the composite basically uses features from both Ionic and Corinthian to create a very overly decorative column head. So the answer of this first question is Corinthian column. Next is, which of the following common column styles was used in Auckland War Memorial Museum? Uh, my voice is again lagging. I don't know, it could be because of the internet speed. Let me try to connect to my mobile hotspot and let me know if that helps. I have connected to my mobile hotspot rather than the Wi-Fi. Let me know if the voice improves with this. And also let me know if you would like me to repeat anything. Okay, thank you. If you would like me to repeat anything, please let me know. I will repeat again in case you guys didn't hear. Okay, Pooja, I will cover very quickly because we have to go to other questions also. I will very quickly again cover about the columns. So the question was about which is this column head. So I will explain from this image. So basically, put it full screen so you can see it clearly. So Doric iron is comparatively more thicker compared to all the other orders. Doric has features like it has flutes in it, which is also in Ionic and Corinthian. So if you cut the section of this column, you will see a circle. You will not see a circle, you will rather see a flower-like shape, a flute-like shape. The difference between all these capital columns is mainly in the capital that they have. So Doric has a very plain capital, it does not have any ornamental capital. Ionic has a capital which has scroll-like ornamentation, while Corinthian has a very decorative capital which is inspired from a native Greek leaf. I'm forgetting the name, I'll see and tell you right now. Then these are the classical Greek orders, and then the Tuscan and Composite is Roman orders which have been inspired from the Greek orders. So the Tuscan is very similar to Doric, but it is different in the way that Tuscan is very slender, Doric is thicker, Tuscan is slender. Tuscan has a base while Doric does not have a base. And also and then Composite has ornamentation from both Ionic and Corinthian in its capital. So we'll just show you the next image now. So these are the different capital heads of Tuscan, Ionic, Doric, Corinthian and Composite. Doric and Tuscan you can see are very similar. The main difference is that Doric is thicker, Tuscan is thinner, and Tuscan, if you cut the section of both of these columns, Tuscan and Doric, Tuscan would be circular in shape, Doric would have flute-like shape. And then when we come to Ionic, it has a scroll-like capital, and then Corinthian has very detailed, very ornamental leaf-like structures, and then Composite combines Ionic and Corinthian in its capital. So these columns are basically more or less distinguished based on the part of their capital. So the answer of the first question was Corinthian. Now coming up to the next question, which of the following common column style was used in Auckland War Memorial Museum? So to answer this question, you will have to first remember that how Auckland War Memorial Museum looks like. So this is the front entrance of Auckland War Memorial Museum. So it's a war memorial and a museum as mentioned in its name. It is in Auckland, New Zealand. It was built in 1920s and it uses the style of neoclassicism. So as you can see very clearly in the columns, you see flute-like structures. That means it is not Tuscan. You see very plain capitals. That means it is not Ionic or Corinthian. So that means the answer would be Doric. So you have to remember the features of these columns. Yeah, Pooja. Apart from Doric, every other column has a base. Doric doesn't have a base. Moving on to the next question. So yeah, I was saying that to remember, to be able to answer these questions, you have to remember the features of these column types so that you can answer them. So the next question is, the Potter Building in New York City is an appropriate example of ornamentation of structure as ornament, structure as architecture, none of the above. So if you have watched your NPTEL courses of week 2, you would know the difference between these terms, and sir has in very elaborated form covered all of these terms and the difference between them. But to be able to answer this question, and in case everybody doesn't remember it right now, I will just quickly cover all the 5 points so that we can answer the question. So the ornamentation of structure, basically it means that there is a structure that is existing. So it could be a column and a beam thing, and then ornamentation is done over this structure. The ornamentation is done over the structure to beautify it. So the structure is built as per the requirement, as per the need, and then it is beautified later with the help of ornamentation. And the example of this is all of your classical buildings, the Pantheon, Parthenon and other buildings. Second comes the structure as ornament. So in this part, the structure as ornament Yeah. So in this part where we talk about structures ornament, how is it different from ornamentation of structure? Is that ornamentation of structure basically means that structure is there, which is a basic column beam thing, and then ornamentation was done over it. While the second type, the structure as ornament, means that the structure itself is acting as an ornament. So this kind of style basically you can see exposed structure and exposed services in this category. And basically what is done is that to use the structure itself, structure को हम किसी, we're not covering the structure with anything, we're not decorating the structure, we're not covering the structure with anything, we're using the structure itself as an ornament itself. We are basically using the structure to be visually pleasing. For example, the Pompidou Center, it's an example of high-tech architecture, Pompidou Center. So Pompidou Center, the main characteristics of that building is that it has all the services exposed, and they have color coded all those services, which makes the building look very interesting and very different. So the structure is completely exposed, it is not covered with other kinds of materials, it is not hidden, nothing. Structure is directly being used as it is, and structure is being used as an aesthetic element. Moving on to the next one, which is structure as architecture. It basically means that the whole, basically architecture is anything and everything around you. Where you're living, where you're studying, where you're working, all those buildings, everything is architecture. Any kind of structure ever built is a part of architecture. So this type basically will include things in which the entire architecture is only structure. There is no other element involved. There are no walls, there are no other things involved. The entire structure is itself the architecture. There is nothing else built. The whole structure, the whole support structure, the structure which is taking the load, the way it is built, that itself is the whole architecture. This is basically usually characterized with very long spans and very tall buildings. And another characteristic that these kinds of buildings would portray is they're very light. They look visually very light and they look very portable. And the example of this is one of the best example would be the Eiffel Tower. We all know that it's just a structure, but it is of course architecture also. So that structure itself is completely architecture. Next is the structure accepted. So what this category basically means is that you have a form, you have a concept in mind, you have a design in mind, and whatever structure that comes in the process of designing, you accept it. You're not putting any extra thing on it, you're not doing any ornamentation, you're not modifying it. It's very simple form and the structure has just been accepted, like how however the structure came out while in the process of designing, you have accepted it. And then the last part is structure ignored. This part basically talks that covers the part that that structural considerations have played very little part in the determination of the form. So in this part, we're not saying that the structure is ignored as in the technicalities of the structure is ignored, that the load is not being transferred or all. No. We're saying that the structure has been ignored while making the form. So whatever the designer or the architect had in mind, they made that form. It is usually used in forms when you are using natural kinds of forms or very unorthodox kind of forms. So in that case, you don't think about structure, you just design what you design. And then later, that thing, that your form, your idea, your concept is fulfilled with the help of structural engineers who somehow try to make the structure according to your form. So that category comes in this. So the question was, Potter Building in New York is an appropriate example of. So this is the Potter Building in New York. It was built in 1883. It was one of the highest, tallest buildings of its time. The architect is Norris, Gershom and Starkweather. And it is one of the first iron frame buildings, and it was also one of the first buildings in New York to have a good fire prevention system. So, as you can see, the base of the building, it had an iron facade, and the remaining it was 11 stories high, and the remaining facade had red brick and terracotta facade. And you can see all the sides of this building have similar ornamentation. It consists of columns, capitals, and panels and arches, and all of these is made from terracotta. And in fact, in at this point, the above point, it is highly decorated. So, as we talked about all these types of structure, and then when you go back to it, you can very easily identify that it is ornamentation of structure. So, basically, the structure has been built, and then that structure has been decorated later over on it. So, this is ornamentation of the structure. Next question, a very similar question. So Lloyd's headquarters building in London is an example of, and the options are ornamentation of structure, structure as ornament, structure as architecture, none of the above. So it's a very similar question, and as we have covered all the terms, that what the terms are, we'll move on to see how Lloyd's headquarters buildings look like. So Lloyd's Buildings is in London, UK. It was built in 1986. It is also known as the Inside Out Building, and it was built by the architects Richard Rogers and partners. And the structural engineer for this building was Arup. Excuse me, sorry. Arup. So yeah, so this is called inside out building. Why is it called inside out building? Is because they made the entire inside of the building free of all services, and they put all the services out, all the staircases, all the kinds of ducts, all the services were on out, and the entire inside plan was free of any obstruction. So this is the plan of this building, Lloyd's building. So it was innovative because of this idea. As you can see, the plan is all very free. It is a grid plan, and it is all very free because all kinds of services have been made on the outside. So all the staircase, lifts, ductwork, electric power conduits, everything is outside, which means, and all these cores, all these services, they are major structural components in any kind of building. So basically, this means that the structure is outside, that the structure basically services, in these services the structure is outside, and hence the entire facade of the building is visible with a lot of service elements, which is basically made from the basic structural elements. So the answer of this would be structure as ornament. We are using the services and the structure as the ornament, in the sense that the entire services and everything is outside, so it is being used as an aesthetic element of the building, which give it is a rectangular building, but because of the provision of all these services out and the structure of these services, it gives it a very unusual form and makes it looks like this. Moving on to the next question. Arrange in chronological order the following styles in architectural history. Uh, I know it would be a little difficult to answer these types of questions, but of course they might come in your exam. So in order to be able to answer these questions, you will have to remember the order of these architectural eras, and I'm providing a image in this one. You can easily Google all these out and then understand it all later. And sir has also given a list of this timeline in his NPTEL lecture, and he has covered a few points. So in order to be able to answer these questions, you will have to remember these styles. So I am providing the timeline in the next slide. So we are starting from this image that I'm using, it has not mentioned the prehistoric part. It's starting from Egyptian. So we have Egyptian, which was, of course, characterized by famous rulers, monumental architecture, pyramids, temples, and of course, other creature like things like sphinx and other things. Next was the classical. Classical style basically covers all the Greek and Roman architecture part, and they used to make a lot of huge monumental temples, and they were characterized by these column and beam structures. And we just learned about Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian columns. And then we move on to the next is the early Christian and medieval era. It was European architecture, and they moved on from the rectangular basilica forms. I will actually put it on full screen so that you can see it better. Yeah, from rectangular basilica forms to classically inspired Byzantine style. So Byzantine style was nothing but use of domes, use of arched windows, and things like that. So early Christian and medieval, and then right after early Christian and medieval, we had Byzantine. So this image lagged Byzantine, so I have just written it over there. So then came Romanesque. So as Romans spread across Europe, uh, Romanesque architecture with rounded arches spread all over Europe. Then we went to Gothic architecture, and Gothic architecture, a lot of cathedrals were built all over Europe, and Gothic architecture is characterized by pointed arches, flying buttress, and other things like that. Then we come to Renaissance architecture, and Renaissance was basically rebirth. It means rebirth. So it was again back to the classical ideas of awakening and age, and it was very common in Italy, France, and England, and they used huge domes in their structures, and they were decorated and other stuff. Then we came to Baroque architecture. Baroque architecture was even more decorated than Renaissance. It was reflected in the dramatic churches of this time, and they had rectangular shapes but extravagant ornamentation. And also then we move on to Rococo, and so while the Baroque period was ending, um, so while the Baroque period was ending, the people started constructing the similar buildings in white, and but Rococo was equally ornamented as Baroque. So then next was American colonial architecture, and then Georgian architecture. These were the eras that were mostly covered in America, so I'm not covering those parts. Then we come to neoclassical, and neoclassical was like again a renewed interest in ideas of Renaissance, and then neoclassical basically revived the classical style but with a twist of modernism, and it was very common in US and UK and other places. In fact, most of the administrative buildings of US have this neoclassical style right now. Then we had Greek revival architecture, then we had Victorian architecture. These are not very huge parts, so they are not usually covered in most of the timelines, but it is mentioned here. And then we have art and cultural movement in architecture. This was a very big movement, and it again received a lot of backlash from. It was basically created to have a backlash against the industrialization, because of industrialization everything was looking similar, everything was becoming very boring, and they all were looking similar, everything was getting into the same kinds of aesthetics. So this movement was started against the industrialization, so they focused more on ornamentation, more on handicrafts, and you would very quickly realize that in the entire timeline of these eras you would see that once comes the ornamentation phase, and then again the designers move on to simpler architecture, easier forms, minimal stuff. They are, and then the next era they again move to more ornamented form of style. So this keeps happening. So when industrialization came, then again simpler forms started building, because It was easy to build. Now we had steel, we had framed structure, so everything started looking similar. So this movement started again to contradict the industrial style, and because of which they again came back to craftsmanship and ornamentation. And Art Nouveau is also on the similar lines as arts and crafts movement, but Art Nouveau is highly influenced with asymmetric forms. And Gaudi, Antonio Gaudi, if you guys are aware, is one of the famous Art Nouveau architect, and he has very famous buildings in Spain which are very organically used. He has used very organic forms of ornamentation and very asymmetric form. Next, we have Beaux Art architecture, and it is also called Beaux Art classicism. And it is basically characterized by order, symmetry, formal design, grandness, and other things. Then we have Neo Gothic architecture, and basically what they started to do in neo-Gothic architecture was to actually apply Gothic architecture, which we just learned was very ornamental, and it had pointed arches and other things. They started to apply those things to modern skyscrapers. So that is what neo-Gothic architecture comprised of. Then we have Art Deco. Again, Art Deco was using what would I say, eccentric forms in architecture. Very different kinds of forms, very different kind of patterns, very dramatic it was. And then we had modernism, and then later we had postmodernism, and those things are still the the modernism styles basically started with uh, Bauhaus and Walter Gropius and other people who went a little towards minimalism. And this basically 20th century trends are a whole different another timeline where you have deconstructivism and modernism, structuralism, postmodernism, and other stuff. So we'll just covering till now. So these are all the eras that have been covered. Yeah, the picture was actually divided in two parts. I divided it in two parts so that you guys can see it more clearly, because if I added the picture in only one slide, it would not have been very clear. And also, I'm sorry, when I'm presenting, I don't see the messages, so I keep checking every 10 minutes if there are any messages. So whatever your questions are, you can put it up in the chat box and I will answer it when I see them. So yeah, this is the timeline. So again, it asked, the question was that arrange in chronological order the following styles: Rococo, Byzantine, Beaux Arts, and Baroque. So Byzantine came first, then we have Baroque, then we have Rococo, then very late we have Beaux Art architecture. So we have Byzantine first, that means Q would be first, then we have Baroque, that means we have S first, then we have Rococo, then means we have P, and then we have Beaux Arts, that means R. So the correct answer would be C, Q, S, P, R, arranging them. Next question is, Haya Irini is an example of which architecture? So I just talked about Roman, Gothic, Baroque, Roman, Byzantine, Gothic, Baroque. We covered all these types just now. So to be able to answer this question, we should be knowing what Haya Irini looks like. So this is how Haya Irini looks like. It was an Eastern Orthodox church. It is now a museum. It is located in Istanbul, Turkey. It looks like a typical Roman basilica, which has a nave and two aisles. So if you guys are aware of it, I'm not sure if you are, because I don't know which year you guys are studying in, or if you are from architecture background. So nave and two aisles. So basically the Roman basilica, I don't have a plan attached. I will probably bring it next time. So these churches used to be elongated. They used to be rectangular and elongated. So the central part that goes is called nave, and then there was a column on both sides of it, and then there were two aisles that go against. So this church also follows the same typical Roman basilica form. uh, One of the characteristics of this church is the use of semicircular arches, and the materials that have been used in this are brick and stone. So like we Roman, Byzantine, Gothic, and Baroque. So I have just written quickly some of the important features of both of, or sorry, not both, all four of these. So the Roman architecture was characterized with domes, vaults, small shrines. They were highly inspired by Greek classical orders and other things. Gothic architecture was known for pointed arches, ribbed vaulting, flying buttresses, taller architectures. Then Byzantine was characterized by use of graceful, classically inspired style. They used brick instead of stone. Before that, stone was being used most places, but they used brick instead of stone. They had domed roofs and elaborate mosaics and classical forms. Excuse me. And Baroque style was very dramatic, and it had irregular shapes and extravagant ornamentations, and it was very common in Russia and in France. The Palace of Versailles is an example of Baroque architecture, if you guys know about it, and you can search it later also. So yeah, so these are the basic features. So when you look at this building, you can see that it is definitely not Gothic, because Gothic is highly ornamented and has flying buttresses and pointed arches. You can see it is also not Roman, because it does not have the typical Roman structure of the columns and the other things. And you can see it is not also Byzantine. Sorry, it is not also Baroque, because it is not overly ornamented and other things. So very clear, it is a major example of Byzantine architecture, and you can see that very evidently here because of the use of the semicircular arches, comparatively simpler form than other, and then the dome on the roof. So yeah, this was an example of Byzantine architecture. Next question. We will do this one question, and then I will take a break of 5 minutes. I will join back in 5 minutes after this question, and we will do the next 8 questions after this. So, which of the following building is an example of Gothic architecture? So I just told you the features of Gothic architecture: ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, pointed arches, very tall structures. So we have four options: Notre Dame des Chartres, France; Pantheon, Rome; Villa Rotonda, Italy; Basilica of Saint Sernin, Toulouse. So in order to be able to answer this question, you would have to remember how these buildings look like. Otherwise, you will not be able to answer these questions. And these are quite famous buildings, so they're easier to remember. For reference, I have added images also. So we have all four buildings here: Notre Dame des Chartres, France; Pantheon, Rome; Villa Rotonda, Italy; Basilica of Saint Sernin, Toulouse. So the question was, which of the following is an example of Gothic architecture? So as you can very evidently see from these images, that Gothic architecture, because it is characterized by pointed roofs and pointed arches and other things. So of course it's Notre Dame de Chartres, France. Notre Dame, France, it's a very famous church, we all know that. But I have also mentioned what other of these buildings from the era. So Pantheon, Rome, is from Roman architecture, you can say classical period. Then Villa Rotonda was actually from Renaissance period. and the Basilica of Saint Cyril in Toulouse was from Romanesque period. So Romanesque period basically what had was they had a Byzantine kind of architecture, and then a little bit of Gothic involved in Byzantine. So Romanesque, you can see the tower behind it and you can see the front, it is very Byzantine like. So yeah, the correct answer is Notre Dame de Chartres, France. And I would take a break of 5 minutes for now, and we will join at 7:05. Which picture, Pooja, you're talking about? If you're talking about the timeline, you can easily Google, you can write the architectural style timeline, and you can get it online, but I would still put it there. Wait. You can take the picture now. I hope you've taken the picture. Okay, I'm taking a break of 5 minutes. I will join back in 5 minutes. You guys can also take a break of 5 minutes. We'll continue in 5 minutes. Hi everyone, I'm back, and I guess the meeting was disconnected for a while. I'm sorry for the disturbance. We will continue. So, we talked about higher yield, right? This also. Yeah, moving on to our next question. Which of the following examples are referred to as live load on a structure? And the options are settlement load, wind load, rain load, and thermal load. And options are PNQ, PNR, PNS, and all PQRS. So before we move forward, we will understand what is live load. So live loads are also called imposed loads, and they are either moving loads or movable loads. So that is easier to remember. They are either moving or they are either movable, and they do not have any impact on acceleration. So all these loads are part of what an occupant brings into a building, and these are normally furniture and movable partitions and also includes people. And imposed loads, which is also another name for live loads, they're basically temporary, they're changeable or they're dynamic, and they act upon a structure. And it is related to usually the occupancy of the space or building where the load is applied. And also live loads are produced by the use and occupancy of a building and structure, and it does not include construction loads, it does not include environmental loads, which is wind loads, snow loads, rain loads, and earthquake loads and flood loads, and it does not include dead loads also. So this question actually asks that which of the following examples are referred to as live load on a structure, but none of these options are actually live loads. So I think probably the question was wrong. The one word that is wrong, they could have written dynamic load, because all of these parts get covered in dynamic load, or there might have been an option where it said none of them, because these four things are not live loads, they are part of dynamic loads. So the correct answer that was provided in the previous year assignment, so which was provided to us, was the option D, all PQRNS. So I think the question should not have been asking about live load, because all of these are not live loads. Live loads includes furniture, users, machinery, equipments, and those things. So I have changed the question, that's why, to dynamic load over here, just to make sense of the last correct answer. So yeah, settlement load, wind load, rain load, thermal load, all of these are dynamic loads, and I think that would be the right question to do. Next question is, which of the following building is an appropriate example of structure ignored in form making? As we discussed in the starting of the class, structure ignored in form making, what it means is that not the technical requirements of structure is ignored, but rather the form or the design of by the designer or the architect was complex, it was unorthodox, it was decided, and the structure had to somehow comply to that form. So that's why we say structure was excuse me, was ignored, because it was not the main point, it was not the focus, it was not the consideration. We had a concept, we had an idea, we had a form in mind, and then the structure was used to somehow comply to that building. So the four options that we have here are Burj Khalifa, Dubai, Chrysler Building, New York, Chapel of Notre Dame du Haut, France. This is not the same Notre Dame Chapel, this is a different Notre Dame Chapel. This is also called Romchap Chapel, just to give you guys the difference. And the 42, Kolkata. So yeah, like I just mentioned, structural ignored in form making. Structural considerations played very little part in the determination of the form, and it did not lead to it did this sector ignored form. It did not lead to any compromise in the structural requirement. Structure is feasible, it is standing because of course the structure is feasible. That is not the point here. The point is that the form did not consider the typical or the regular structure, and this type of structure, this type of building is basically used when the form is unorthodox. It could be organic form inspired by nature, So structure was not considered to give aesthetic form to architecture. Structure was given just to take the loads of it. The entire form of the architecture, the aesthetics comes from the architectural form. It does not come from the structural form at all. So the four buildings that have been given are Burj Khalifa, Chapel of Notre Dame du Haut, France, Chrysler Building, and the 42 Kolkata. It is very evident from these pictures that Burj Khalifa, Chrysler Building, Kolkata, all of these, which are basically actually skyscrapers, they are following a structure. They are have very regular structure. You can see it is not unorthodox. They are regular formal structures that is being used. So the correct answer would be Chapel of Notre Dame du Port, France. It is also called Romchat Chapel. It is not the same chapel of Notre Dame that we discussed earlier. This is in Duhart. This is in Hort, France, and it is also called Romchat Chapel, if that helps you remember. Next question. Um, because the last unit was about the architecture of animals, which was extensively covered, and we had seen different examples from different animals. Yeah, we had seen different examples from different animals, like the weaver birds, the termites, the honeybees, wasps, weavers, spiders, ants, and other things. So this question is from that part. So the question is, you have to match the following. So you have been given PQRS, the name of the animal, and you have been given 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 images of the shelters, and you have to match the following. So to be able to match it, you should the animals that we have are sociable weaver, termite, social wasp, vogelkop, bowerbird. And to be able to match it, you should be able to firstly identify what these structures are. So that's what I do in the next slide. So the first structure that we see here is actually a termite mound. It is called a termite mound or a termite tower. It is built by termites, and how it is built, the material that they use is mud, chewed wood, their own saliva, and their own feces. So these are built of that. Next, what we see in the image, they are called paper nests. They are made with plant pulp, wooden particles, and saliva secretions. They are made by wasps, these paper nests. Then what is the next structure we see? It is called bower. Uh, Basically, they are small huts of grass and sticks. They are built by bower birds, and they usually make it and then decorate it with fruits to attract their mate. Next, what we see is actually a community dwelling housing of birds on an electrical pole, and these community dwelling housing, this nest kind of thing, is actually made of grass and sticks. So now we know what all these structures are and what kind of animals make them. So social weaver is basically a weaver bird that live in a community, so that's why it is called sociable weaver. So P goes with 4. Then we have Q as termite, and we have just understood that the first image is the termite mound or the termite tower, so Q goes with 1. And then R is social wasp, and then we just learned that the image 2 is a paper nest. It is basically built by a wasp, so R goes with 2. And then we have vogelkey bower bird, and then the third structure is actually a bower made of sticks and grass, so S goes with 3. So the correct option is B. Next question. So the previous year assignments, usually the assignments that you guys have only 10 questions. In the last class, I only covered 10 questions, but then we had a little time on our hand. So I thought I'll increase the number of questions this time so that we can utilize this time better. So I have referred another previous year's question and added 5 more questions from those. Just a second. Excuse me. So which of the following is an example of structure as ornament? As I have already explained what structure as ornament means. So in this case, the structure itself acts an ornament. It is usually characterized with exposed structure or exposed surfaces, and it is used aesthetically and itself is visually pleasing without adding the ornamentation. You don't need to add the ornamentation on the top because the structure itself is being used as an aesthetic form. So the four buildings that we have here are Parthenon, Centre Pompidou in Paris, Habitat 67 and Taj Mahal. So I have added images of all four buildings. Parthenon, Centre Pompidou, Habitat 67 and Taj Mahal. So you can very easily say that Parthenon and Taj Mahal have ornamentation on structure which is very visible. And then I mentioned about Centre Pompidou. I'm not sure if I mentioned about it now, but Centre Pompidou is actually a part of high-tech architecture, and oh yeah, I just mentioned about it that they have used different color coding for their services. So basically, Centre Pompidou is a museum. It's a museum, Centre Pompidou of modern art, and they have the entire structure is exposed, their entire service is exposed. In fact, they have used and color coded the surface to basically look like aesthetics. So yeah, the correct answer of this would be Centre Pompidou in Paris. Next question. The Millennium Dome in London is a best fitted example of ornamentation of structure, structure as ornament, structure as architecture, none of the above. So this is how the Millennium Dome looks like. It was built in 1999. Its height is 95 meters. It is also a part of high-tech architecture. The engineer for this building was Ian Liddell. Architects were Richard Rogers and Mike Davies. It is a tension fabric structure and it is supported with cable and vertical posts. So the question was that what is the best fitted example of ornamentation of structure? Structure is ornament, structure is architecture, none of the above. So when you look at this building, so of course this is not ornamentation on structure. This is also not structure as ornament. It is rather structure as architecture, because the entire building, it is a tension fabric structure. So the entire building is just a structure. The entire building is being supported just with structure. That's all. This is a tension fabric structure, and that is what the building is. So that's why the answer would be structure as architecture. Yeah, so the answer is structure as architecture. Excuse me. Moving on to the next question. Flying buttress was extensively used in Egyptian architecture, Roman architecture, Greek architecture, Gothic architecture. I think all would know the answer because I have just mentioned it many times regarding it, that flying buttress where they are common. But I'm just explaining what buttress and what flying buttress actually are so that you remember it further. So buttress is basically an exterior support and it is usually made of masonry and it is projecting from the face of the wall and it serves either to strengthen or resist the side thrust that is created by the load on the arch, on an arch or a roof. So it's nothing but an extended masonry, a part of wall which has been extended masonry to take the load that is coming from the arch or the roof. So flying buttress, what is a flying buttress? So flying buttress is also called arch buttress. It is a specific form of buttress which is composed of an arch that extends from the upper portion of a wall or a pier of great mass in order to convey the lateral loads to the ground that are necessary to push a wall outwards. So basically there's a wall, then the flying buttress is arched structures or arched buttresses, and then they connect to another structure, and that's how they transfer the load. The flying buttresses transfer all the lateral loads to the ground with the help of the structure. But the extended structure, for example, a buttress, you just have an extended structure. In a flying buttress, the extended structure is actually connected to the main building via an arch, and the arch is transferring the load to the extended structure, and then the extended structure transfers the load to the ground. So this is what buttress and what flying buttress is. And as we have discussed about many times, that Gothic architecture is actually characterized by flying buttresses and pointed towers and other things. So yeah, the correct answer is Gothic architecture. Next question is, user load, which is removable, is called as dynamic load, impact load, live load, or dead load. So first of all, what is user load? User load includes people, furniture, factory machinery, movable equipment. And talking about all these four kinds of loads, I'll just define them so that you understand what these loads are. So dynamic load is any kind of load that changes over time, and it mainly includes environmental load like wind, seismic activity, rain, snow, other things. Impact load is defined as the force provided by a sudden load on a structural part instead of a constant and sustained force applied over a long time. So impact load is anything when a sudden thing occurs, sudden load happens on a structural part. In there's a structure, it has all its loads in place, and then suddenly one kind of load impacts it. That is called impact load. The example of this is basically hammering a wall. Next is live load. They are also called imposed loads, and they are either moving loads or movable loads. And then dead load is on the structure is the result of the weight of the permanent components of the structure, such as beams, floor slabs, columns, walls. So dead load is basically the weight of the structure itself. It is called dead load. So our question was that user load, which is removable, they're also calling it user load, and they're also saying that it is removable, is called as. So it is very evident that the clear answer would be live load, because live load, as we just discussed, it is either moving loads, or it is either movable loads. So these are either moving loads or movable loads. So the correct answer would be the user load, the live load. Moving on to the last question of today's session. Sun-dried earth block is called adobe, stabilized block, fly ash brick, rammed earth block. So we will see the definition of all kinds of these blocks, these building materials. All of these are building materials, different kind of building materials. So adobe bricks or mud bricks are made of earth with a fairly high clay content and straw. They are fireproof, they are durable and biodegradable. And they are non-toxic building material, and they are sun-dried. Stabilized blocks are also made of mud. They are called SMB, stabilized mud blocks. They are manufactured by compacting a wetted mixture of soil, sand, and a stabilizer, it's another component, in a machine into a high density block. These blocks are used for the construction of load bearing machinery. Fly ash brick. So fly ash brick, FAB, is a building material. Excuse me. So FAB is a building material. Excuse me. So FAB is a building material, specifically masonry units, and it contains either class C or class F fly ash and water. So they are made with fly ash and water. Excuse me. Then we have rammed earth block. So rammed earth, it is a building material made by compacting certain kinds of soils, and it has been used by many civilizations since time immemorial. And in making these building blocks, the soil is rammed into a box shaped mold, and rammed earth walls, in comparison to adobe bricks, are built in more damp, humid climates where adobe bricks are practically impossible. So the property of adobe bricks is that they are sun dried, and rammed earth blocks are usually built in more damp and humid climates, and they are manufactured there because adobe bricks cannot be built in those damp and humid climates. And another thing is that the difference between adobe and brick is that adobe is sun dried, whereas a brick is kiln fired at a very high temperature. So they're both made of clay only, but what is the difference between a brick and an adobe is that adobe is sun dried, and the brick is kiln fired at a very high temperature. So when this happens, the clay changes and it will not soften again if the brick gets wet. So that's what is the difference. So the correct answer would be adobe. And I have done 15 questions today, but we are still done by 7:30. So I wanted next 15 minutes I will wait in. All of you can put your questions, whatever your doubts or whatever your question is, in the chat box. I would try to answer all those questions as per my capacity. If I will not know the answer to those questions, I will try to answer them in the next session. So you can please ask your questions to me now, and then we will wait. We all will can stay in the call till for 15 minutes. If anyone has any doubts, you can put the question in, and then I will answer that. Rishi, your question is, yeah. I'll just go to that slide. Yeah. So, ornamentation of structure basically means that you have a basic structure. So, what is a basic structure? Basic structure is basically you have a post, which is the column, and you have a beam. So, post beam structures are very regular and very basic structures, and that's how, since the classical period, things have been constructed in that form. That we have post, we have beam, and then that structure is built. So what is ornamentation of structure is that this basic structure exists. There is a column, there is a beam, and the basic structure is happening, that the beam is taking load from the roof, and that the beam is transferring the load to the column, and so on, and the column is transferring it to the ground. So what is happening in this type of category is that to make the building look more aesthetically pleasing, you are doing ornamentation over the structure. For example, this building, this Auckland War Memorial Museum, because it has these Doric columns. So what you do is, you can have a column It can be rectangular, it can be circular, it could be simpler looking. But what we do here is that we decorate or we ornament the structure, we ornament the column. For example, here the column, the regular circular column is instead we have these kind of flutes things, which is basically a flower kind of thing. Then you have decorated capitals, then you have decorated entablatures. So you are basically decorating the structure from outside. You are ornamenting the structure from outside. Basic structure exists, and then you are ornamenting the structure from outside. This is what is ornamentation of structure. I hope I was clear, Rishi. Any more questions? You guys can please ask. No, I don't think it will come on because this point has not been covered in the NPTEL course. So I'm also not very sure of this point, but I will research on this and come. But from what I can think right now about it, is that I don't think it will come in structure of ornament because exposed brickwork is not the part of structure. Here we are talking about the structure. Brickwork, unless it's a load bearing structure, the brick is not taking load, it is not the structure, it is just a place to fill. Your structure would be mainly the columns, the beams, and other things. So anything that is taking load is the structure. So I'm not sure, I don't think the exposed brick wall would come under structure of ornament. But I will search about it and I will give you a definite answer next time. This is what I think from what I can understand. We'll wait for 5 more minutes to see if anyone has any questions. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat box. I will try to answer it. If nobody has any questions, we will end the meeting at 7:45. If you have any questions, please put it in the box. So I'm guessing no one has any more doubts. We waited for everyone to ask their doubts. If you still have any doubt, this is the last time I'm asking. If you still have any doubt, you can please message on the group meeting chat, and I will try to answer it. In case after this session ends and then you remember some kind of doubt, you can ask it in the next session also. I don't mind. You can ask about the previous week question also in the next class. So if no one has any doubts, we would end the meeting here, and I will see you in the next live session. I will see you all in the next live session. Have a good evening, you all. Bye bye.